Welcome back. Some sections of the country's Refugees Act are unconstitutional. That's the ruling by the Western Cape High Court, and it's following an application by non-profit organization Scalabrini Centre. The Refugees Act states that asylum seekers who do not renew their visas within 1 month of the date of expiry are considered to have abandoned their asylum applications. Now, for more on this, we are joined by the head of Advocacy and Legal Advisor at Scalabrini Centre, James Chapman. A very good afternoon to you, James. Thank you so much for your time. The reasons you approached the High Court for this?
Good afternoon. So we approached the High Court because at the beginning of 2020, there were a series of amendments to the Refugees Act, and this particular one had the effect that there would be, if it were enforced, there would be the violation of the principle of non-refoulement. People would be forced to return to countries where their life, liberty, fundamental human rights would be at risk. And that's something that couldn't stand, that couldn't be maintained, that because of a mere time period, because of not acting within 30 days, people would be forced to return to a situation where they had fled, fearing for their lives. And so, we put in an initial application and got an interdict from the application of these provisions, but then we also had to challenge the constitutionality of the provisions to ensure that they didn't remain in our law. And so we approached the court basically to protect women, men, and children, to ensure that their asylum protection was safeguarded, even if they did go beyond the 1 month period.
Right. So now, on paper, the matter is where it is, but there also needs to be implementation. What kind of relief are you hoping for?
So we're hoping that the Department of Home Affairs either goes back to the drawing board and promulgates better legislation, or even maintains the legislation that is currently in place, because we have a very good, very human rights protecting Refugees Act, refugee regulations, and we follow international law. It's just that these recent amendments, or fairly recent amendments from 2020, serve to derail and decrease the protection space. So we're hoping that this judgment will help ensure that there's greater protection afforded to asylum seekers, and that they're able to process their asylum claims effectively with the Department of Home Affairs without fear of or risk of being arrested, detained, and deported back to a country where they fled, just because of a technicality, because of a time period.
James, I mean, I would imagine that a lot of them are valid reasons, but what reasons have you come across or know of that asylum seekers are unable to renew their visas in the stipulated time?
There are a series of reasons for which it happens. For the last over a decade, there have been huge issues with accessing refugee reception offices across the country. Very long queues. Sometimes people will wait a week or two before they were able to access refugee reception offices. There are a number of policies that actually made this even more difficult. Like, for instance, there was a policy that said, if you applied at one office and then were extending at another, you'd have to travel halfway across the country to go and extend your document. You had practices like they're requiring people to extend their documents after maybe 1 month or 3 months, which also put huge burdens on people in terms of accessing the refugee reception offices and maintaining their livelihoods, maintaining their work. There were a series of factors beyond instances where, sort of hospitalization or, a series of circumstances beyond people's control would prevent accessing refugee reception offices. And must bear in mind that this is not just for like sort of men and women, also children. Anybody who has asylum documents, if it had gone beyond 1 month, they would be at risk. But this judgment protects them.
Just before I let you go, James, I want to go back to the point of implementation. It's very important. Having a document in place does not mean that, everybody knows that, firstly, the document is in place and what exactly that means now that it's in place. It needs to be implemented. There are certain levels that it needs to reach certain people that need to know that such a ruling is now in place. How can you ensure that now that you've won this court case, that the refugees are not victimized? Because police are still going to think that there's a job to be done, that there are refugees that are not here legally that need to be apprehended and essentially sent back home. But then there's a court case that is in their favor. How are you going to ensure that they're not victimized, and that those that need to know that this case is as it is now is as it is now?
Great question. So one of the positives, and it actually relates to our strategy with respect to this case, is that there was an interim interdict as our first course of action, and we applied to the court for an urgent interdict to prevent the application of these provisions. So these provisions haven't been in force since we got that interdict in place from 2020. So there is a degree or a modicum of protection already afforded. Albeit that the Refugees Act itself talks to people being at risk of having abandoned their claims. But we really just need to work to raise awareness. It's incumbent upon the Department of Home Affairs to also ensure that Home Affairs officials as well as law enforcement officials are made aware of the ruling, the finding of the Western Cape High Court. And it's a wonderful, the opportunity we have today to just spread the word and make sure that there's awareness raised about this, so that people don't fall into the anvil of being arrested, detained, and deported.
Most definitely. I'm glad that we are able to play our part in ensuring that the message does spread far and wide. James, thank you so much for joining us here today on eNCA. That is the head of advocacy and legal advisor at Scalabrini Centre, James Chapman.